He could only be so lucky.
No comment.
Oh, come on.
Gary, I see your smiling face too.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay, we're live, people. Okay, it's 7 o'clock and we'll call this meeting to order of the Dunn County Board of Supervisors, Wednesday, May 20th, 2020. Please bear with us. We've got about a 30-second lag time here between us for some reason in this room. So if we act like we don't know what we're doing, we're having some technical problems, I guess. We will call the meeting to order and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Hold on just a moment, please. We'll get the flag up there in a second. There we go. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag
To the flag,
United States
of America, and to the republic for which it stands,
under God,
one nation,
indivisible,
under God,
with liberty and justice for all.
and justice for
For
all.
all.
I think after hearing that, we have probably some lag in everybody's throughout the whole system. Approval of minutes. Has someone been able to look the minutes over so we can have a motion?
I so move.
Looks like
I so move.
Gary Steen
I so move.
moves.
Gary Steen.
Who is the second? Gary Steen moves. And a second?
I'll second, Dave.
Okay,
second it.
Supervisor
Morehouse.
Johnson
I'll second.
seconds. This is bad. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. As you can see, there's quite a bit of lag, so please bear with us while we go through this meeting. We have to call the roll. I apologize. Tried to skip one line here. So we'll have the clerk call the roll.
Supervisor Johnson,
Here.
Supervisor Bart,
Can you
Chairman
hear
Bartlett,
me? Here.
Supervisor Headland,
Here.
Supervisor Score,
Here.
Supervisor Steen,
Here.
Supervisor Zons, Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Here.
Supervisor Maves,
Here.
Supervisor Quinn,
Here.
Supervisor Rogers,
Here.
Supervisor Anderson,
Here. Here.
Supervisor Kinnear,
Here.
Supervisor Crumry,
Here.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Here.
Supervisor Keeter,
Here.
Supervisor Vogel,
Here.
Supervisor McCullough,
Here.
Supervisor Story,
Here.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Here.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Here.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Here.
Supervisor Kennedy, Supervisor Kennedy,
She is here. She's muted, but she is here.
Supervisor Tripp,
Here.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Here.
Supervisor Jensen,
Here.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Here.
Supervisor Bauer,
Here.
Supervisor Leno,
Here.
Supervisor Hartung,
Here.
Okay, if I may, just a technical point. I think our lag situation is getting a little bit better. But if everybody would remember, if you only need to speak briefly and you are muted, push your space bar, hold it, speak, and then lift it back off. That will temporarily unmute you. You can say here or yes or whatever, and then lift your finger up and you will be muted again. All right. Presentation of petitions, memorials, and other communications. We have none. Appointments. You've all been emailed the appointments. Economic Development, Business Local Loan Review Committee, the Economic Development Corporation Board, the Elk Creek Lake Rehab and Protection District, the Ethics Inquiry Board, the Library Board, the Library Planning Committee, and the Transit Commission and the Transit Coordinating Committee all need board approval. So I need a motion to accept those appointments as printed.
I so move.
Supervisor Steen moves.
All second.
Supervisor McCullough second. I realize there's a lag, just so I realize that I asked for it and then it seems like it's a long time, but anyway, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. And the two for Local Emergency Planning Committee and Wisconsin Counties Utility Tax Association are appointments by the chair. And you've had all those sent to you. We'll go to the report of the county manager. And so Mr. Miller, you are up. Good evening, everybody. The first item, I just want to remind everybody, most of you have already turned in your disclosure of economic interest. For those of you who have not, it is due by the end of the month. This is a form that you fill out that discloses your financial interests, your private financial interests,
in businesses and other holdings to assure that you don't have any conflict of interest in your capacity as a supervisor. If you have not filled them out or if you've misplaced the form, please contact me. We will get you another form, but by county code, they are due by the end of the month if you have not turned yours in. Thank you very much to those of you who have already done so. In your packet, we have 3 department annual reports from Child Support, from the Register of Deeds, and from the Veterans Services. When we meet in person, those are normally presented orally as well. This format tonight's been a perfect illustration, encourages brevity. So I'm simply going to ask, hopefully you've all had an opportunity to read those reports. Are there any questions that I can record and pass along to the department head to get back to you at a subsequent date with answers? Okay, hearing none. As usual, every month you have a page that has the purchase orders over $40,000. We only have 3 for this month from Public Works Facility in the amount of $179,642 and 67 cents for the costs on remodeling the community services building. There is remodeling that is going on. We are replacing caulk on the exterior of the building. That is an ongoing project. So that's what that money is for. The purchase order for solid waste in the amount of $68,759.31 is for hauling costs to the landfill from the transfer station. And then finally, from highway, there was a purchase of a 2021 International Triaxle in the amount of $186,57.84. Are there any questions about the purchase orders over 40,000?
Supervisor Kinnear here. Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yes,
Mr.
Supervisor.
Miller, thank you. I was wondering, Mr. Miller, are we getting towards the end of large remodeling bills for the new building?
We are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to Supervisor Anderson asked if he could give a report from the Community Resources and Tourism Committee regarding broadband. So Supervisor Anderson, we would hear from you at this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very happy to report that we finished the full application. Congratulations to Bob Colson. It was a lengthy ordeal to fill out the Broadband Forward certification application. And that was done. A great deal of work and effort went into getting that done. And it was sent in last week. And we don't know when we will hear, but it was sent into Public Service Commission. And when we get that certification, and we expect we will be one of the first counties again in this area. You remember we were the first county to be telecommuter forward certified. And that was a feather in our cap. Many of the other counties in this area, 10 counties, still have not gotten that certification, but they're working at it. What this Broadband Forward is going to do for us is, quite frankly, make it much more able to get grants, to be able to move forward in doing the application of fiber and other telecommuter forward technology. So I really thank the Highway Committee and the PRD and my committee CRT all reviewed this and approved it. And now I'm happy to report to all of you supervisors, we're waiting until we get the certification. And then one more thing on Broadband Forward, broadband rather. We did get 3 new grants here in Dunn County at this last application. 2 of them went to 24/7 telecom. And those are 100% for sure now. And they will be beginning those projects in installing fiber optics in the Pheasant Crossing area, which is north of Menominee, and will cover 3 townships: Town of Menominee, Township of Sherman, and Township of Tainter. And that's going to be a great accomplishment when that is finished. The other one is called Solar Project, which is south of the Township of Menominee and Town of Dunn, and that's near the Dunn Electric Solar Project farm. There's 6 miles of broadband, or rather fiber, that will be installed there by 24/7. And they got that grant. And the other one is up in the northeast corner of Dunn County. Bloomer Telephone got a grant to apply fiber in, I'm not sure how far south it goes, but it's Town of Grant in the Sand Creek Township, and I believe down to the Township of Colfax, and so that will be installed too. So we're very proud. We think that with what we've done in Dunn County here with our telecommuter forward and our positive attitude toward broadband expansion, that they got these grants, and we had letters of support and everything. And Chairman Bartlett tells me that up in his township area, that town is Sheridan and others, Mosaic is reaching out in those areas. And we have 9 broadband providers here within Dunn County. And we're trying to work with all of them to encourage them that they need to get expanded. I reached out to our superintendent of schools, Joe Zendowski, last week and asked him, really, with schools closed, and I think we have, well, other than Elkmont, Colfax, Boyceville, and Menominee, there are many other school districts that touch into Dunn County. And many of those students right now cannot get any education at home because they have either 0 or very slow or unlimited or limited broadband service. So the education that we think should be going on right now is not able to go on in these rural areas. And then we could spread it. They talk about telemedicine, the same thing right now. People out in the rural areas might not be able to, many times they can get help from their physician over the internet, or they can subscribe for medicine with their pharmacy. So right now, it really has come to the head that here in Dunn County, those areas that do not have broadband service are really hurting. That ends my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to number 9, consideration of resolutions, reports, and ordinances from the standing committees. From the executive committee, we have a resolution authorizing FY 2020 budget adjustment for solid waste and recycling program. Speaking or a motion for the resolution, Supervisor.
So, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Headland moves. And
I'll second it.
Supervisor Gary Bjork seconds. Speaking to the resolution. Anybody volunteering, or should we have,
I can do it.
our chief financial officer on too?
I can also.
Manager Miller.
Well, speak to this.
The guy at the end of the table will now address the board. The reality is that revenues are down for our solid waste and recycling program, and costs are up. Despite our best projections on revenues, the cost, the value of recycled commodities has continued to be in historic lows, while the volume of waste being brought to the transfer station in the first quarter of the year is lower than it has been in past years as well. The cost of running the remote sites for collection and hauling, along the costs of staffing continue to be very expensive. The result is that when we project the trends through the first quarter of the year forward to the end of the year, we are projecting a $330,000 shortfall, which is what initiated this request for a budget adjustment from the general fund's fund balance to the solid waste and recycling program to sustain it through the end of the year on a model that has the 8 remote sites operating on Saturday for 8 hours and has the transfer station and drop off operating on a regular basis on its regular hours. Without this shortfall, that level of service cannot be provided. It was fully discussed and vetted by the Solid Waste and Recycling Board, which requested the budget adjustment. It was then discussed by the Planning Resources and Development Committee, which also recommended it. Finally, it went to Executive Committee, which again, after a thorough review, was unanimously recommended for approval.
Any questions or other speaking to the resolution?
I do have a question. What do you see in the future?
Okay, Supervisor Bauer?
Bauer, sorry. Supervisor Bauer here. What do you see in the future as you go through the end of this year? What do you see for next year?
That's a very good question. I do not want to belabor this meeting with the answer. The short answer is we need to sit down with the leadership of the townships and the cities and discuss the future of solid waste and recycling in Dunn County. It's pretty clear that the model we have been following for the past couple of decades is no longer sustainable, which is not to say that we cannot provide solid waste and recycling program, but it does require the consensus and the participation of the townships and the municipalities within the county in order to make it work. So we are going to be initiating those conversations with the leadership of those units of government to find out if they want to continue in basically in a consortium where we throw all of us together and try to get some economies of scale, or if alternatively one or more or some of them want to try to go it alone. We need that answer before we can answer your question about next year.
Any other questions or speaking to the resolution?
Thank you for your answer.
If not, I don't see any other questions or hands raised. This is a roll call vote. And so we'll have the clerk take the roll, take the vote.
Supervisor Jensen, Supervisor Jensen,
Supervisor Jensen, you are muted.
Yeah, I'm here
Okay.
now. Yeah,
Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy,
Yeah.
Supervisor Kinnear,
Yes,
Supervisor Crumry,
Yes, I guess. You didn't hear me.
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter,
Yes.
Supervisor Leno,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves,
Yes.
Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor
can't get
Niehoff,
that over.
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Come here.
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
How come?
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Put a mute.
Supervisor Score,
Yes.
Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Story,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel,
Yes.
Supervisor Zons is absent. Supervisor Anderson,
Yes.
Supervisor Bauer,
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Chairman Bartlett. Motion passes.
All right. Motion passes. Moving on to A2, resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of not to exceed 14,280,000 taxable general obligation healthcare center refunding bonds, series 2020A. I need a motion.
So move, Sheila Story.
Anderson, second.
Supervisor Anderson seconds. Speaking to this, Mr. Stray, are you on?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am. I'm happy to.
Okay. Our Chief Financial Officer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before the county board tonight is a resolution which is follow-up to effort that's been going on since February to look at options to refinance bonds that were issued in 2012 for the neighbors of Dunn County to construct the new facility then. The bonds have a call date, meaning that they can be refinanced coming up in 2022. And in meeting with our municipal advisor in late January, he identified that there is the potential that we could do an advance refinancing of the outstanding principal in April of 2022 and realize significant savings. When the market was still normal before things went crazy in reaction to COVID-19 and the economic downturn, the projected estimated savings were approximately $700,000 to $750,000 to do an advanced refinancing. The interest rate on the bonds in 2022 and later years are approximately 4% on average. The market interest rates are considerably less than that. So that process started, and we went through the process, the normal process of doing a competitive sale, and the feedback from the market at that point when things started going crazy with the market dropping substantially and then kind of yo-yoing around over the days and weeks, we shifted approaches to a negotiated sale. You may recall last month, we were all prepared to issue a direct sale recommendation to the county board. But at the end of the day, when it came down to final negotiations at that point in time to make a decision, things had changed again to the point where it wasn't in the county's best interest. The savings were significantly less than $700,000. My recollection is roughly $400,000 to $450,000. So substantially less than the average market terms. So after that did not happen, had more conversation with our bond counsel as well as our financial advisor, municipal advisor about options. Do we just scrap everything and wait for another time, or do we do something different? And what's before you tonight is what's called typically a parameters resolution. And it's another approach that the county board sets its minimum expectations for savings, and the parameters or expectations before a decision can be made to execute a sale to refinance the existing debt. It is commonly used for organizations, governments in particular, that do a lot of refinancing. Your larger counties, larger municipalities that are very active in the debt market will have these in place quite often. And bond counsel is very familiar with these. So we talked through that, and based on the market analysis in January before the market crash, these were the parameters that were put together to more or less reflect an approach that would allow us to be more flexible and timely, because when you're refinancing in a market that's like this right now, and even with refinancing, timing can be everything. And we know the timing of county board meetings and so on for the normal approach, there can be significant lags. So this was put together with parameters, 3 parameters, primarily limiting the maximum amount of the final debt issue at $14,280,000. The second is the refunding of these bonds must produce a net savings of at least 5%, which in dollar terms is estimated to be $700,000 in savings or greater over the existing debt service or principal and interest payments. And then the final thing is significant parameter is final maturity of the bonds can be no later than April 1st, 2032, which is the current expiration of the debt. So basically what that's saying is putting in place that you can only issue up to a maximum of that dollar amount. You have to generate the savings at a minimum of $700,000 to $750,000. And you can't go any longer than we are now with the existing debt. That is very good requirements, very standard requirements in the industry. And these are the recommendations that were put together. Again, the principal advantage of this approach versus the standard approach of doing resolutions and waiting for the process in a normal scenario is that we would be able to adjust and react when the opportunity comes along. This resolution, if approved, would delegate authority to the chief financial officer and the county manager to work with the municipal advisor and bond counsel to move forward with a sale if these minimum parameters are met. So that is really the intent here, is to avoid the time lag. If the opportunity comes up, we're able to move forward with it.
All right, any questions?
I have a question.
That Supervisor Leno.
Yeah. Is there any part of this resolution that is dealing with non-callable bonds? And if so, what is the dollar amount of that amount?
No, there's no part of this that is related to the non-callable. Non-callable is basically as it sounds. We do not have the option to refinance that. So no, we're not looking to make any other adjustments. What this is in response to, as of April 1, 2022, the bonds after that can be refinanced at our option.
All right. So is there an outstanding balance of non-callable bonds?
Yes, those would be the principal amounts that we'll be paying between now and April of 2022. I don't happen to have that figure in front of me.
Okay, that's fine.
Supervisor Rogers, you have a question?
Yes, kind of a two-part question. How long is this? Does this go through June, or is this indefinite, the length of time this is open? And then also, first, I'd like to say that you did a good job of not pulling the plug on a bad deal 2 months ago, so thank you. So I feel more confident in what you're doing now. The fact that we can refinance in 2 years and have some eventual savings available too, are we taking that into account with that 5% savings? Because you could maybe gain 3.5% and then not lose the other costs if you wait 2 years.
Yes, to answer the second part of your question, yes, that is part of the evaluation. And thank you for your comments about not pulling the trigger. Certainly, we are trying to refer back to normal market metrics. And thankfully, we had that analysis from late January, which really did give us a good solid foundation of what to go from. As far as the minimum savings, these are typical parameters used for setting minimum standards for refinancing. It's a best practice recommendation from Government Finance Officers Association of the United States and Canada, as well as other industry standards. So these are solid metrics that are very commonly used in debt management policies across the governments across the country. As far as expiration on these, there is not an expiration date on this. Certainly, again, we would not have authority, no one would have authorization to move forward if these metrics aren't met. So let's say the market is very slow to respond or recover between now and 2022. Then nothing happens. We certainly don't go forward. There is no requirement that we refinance these bonds. It's just doing our due diligence to look for savings in every potential opportunity. One of the things working against us right now is because the market crashed and interest rates like on our savings accounts and so on, those play into the overall calculations of an advanced refinancing because you have to have those interest earnings to offset some of the costs to do the advanced refinancing. So there's multiple moving pieces that have to occur here. And that's the detailed analysis that our municipal advisor puts together and we review together as a team along with our bond counsel.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any. Do you, Mr. Miller? All right. This also is a roll call vote and we'll have the clerk take the roll.
Supervisor Johnson,
Yes.
Supervisor Kennedy, Supervisor Kennedy,
Supervisor Kennedy, if you hold your space bar down, you can vote.
Someone else gave me different things. Yes.
Supervisor Kinnear,
Yes.
Supervisor Crumry,
Yes.
Supervisor Keeter,
Yes.
Supervisor Leno,
Yes.
Supervisor Maves,
Yeah.
Supervisor McCullough,
Yes.
Supervisor Morehouse,
Yes.
Supervisor Niehoff,
Yes.
Supervisor Prochnow,
Yes.
Supervisor Quinn,
Yes.
Supervisor Rogers,
Yes.
Supervisor Score,
Yes.
Supervisor Steen,
Yes.
Supervisor Story,
Yes.
Supervisor Tripp,
Yes.
Supervisor Vandermeulen,
Yes.
Supervisor Vogel,
Yes.
Supervisor Zons is absent. Supervisor Anderson,
Yes, yes,
Supervisor Bauer,
Yes.
Supervisor Gary Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Larry Bjork,
Yes.
Supervisor Calabrese,
Yes.
Supervisor Hartung,
Yes.
Supervisor Headland,
Yes.
Supervisor Jensen,
Yes.
Chairman Bartlett.
Yes. All right, motion passes. Moving on to 9A3, resolution authorizing acceptance and expenditure of federal and state COVID-19 reimbursement funds. Motion for the resolution. Supervisor Gary Steen moves.
Second.
Supervisor Larry Bjork seconds. And speaking to the resolution, our CFO, Mr. Stride, do you want to take this?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. This resolution was put together in consultation with Corporation Counsel. The question I asked early on when the COVID-19 emergency declaration was declared for Dunn County was, what can we do as far as finances to assist the departments, knowing that the operational plans for departments and for the county dramatically changed with that. And in some cases, I'm not going to say all, but in some cases, many departments, many of us had unintended or unexpected expenditures, which can happen in a normal year, but in some cases it can be pretty substantial. In addition to that, we've been hearing about and beginning to see reimbursements, additional funding awarded by the state or through the state from the federal government for programs for additional support dollars and so on for departments to, in reaction to COVID-19 response and preparation, planning, et cetera. The intent on this resolution was really to get county board support and recognition of that fact that departments' budgets are being impacted and basically having to be adjusted pretty much on the fly. And there are monies coming in. Now, the normal approach is when these funds come in, we have to go through the normal budget adjustment process because adjusting a budget is a statutory requirement. But then what that does in a situation like this is it can hamstring or delay departments from being able to use funding that's awarded to them from the state or from the federal government. And so it puts departments kind of in an awkward position, puts all of us in a challenging position if there's a timely need to utilize funds that have been identified as supporting for COVID-19 specific expenditures. The expectation is departments will still work within their budgets, and funding that's awarded to them. But in this case, this would provide support and utilize the funding. And then the intent is that at the end of the year, the county manager and the chief financial officer will do a final reconciliation and a final budget adjustment for county board action. This is intended to allow the departments to be able to react and utilize these funds quickly, especially if the situation warrants that. So it's the flexibility and being able to respond to things quickly and utilize the funds, but it's also to hopefully avoid flooding the standing committees and the county board with a whole torrent of funding and budget adjustments, whether it's new money or shifting between budgets or things like that. So that really was the intent here of this resolution. Talking with Corporation Counsel, we can't really, neither of us are comfortable with recommending a budget adjustment at this point because we really have no definitive number to provide you, which would definitely, be a blank check approach, and neither of us are comfortable. So this is felt to be the next best thing to at least get recognition from the county board and establish the process that we will come back at the end of the year with a final reconciliation.
Any questions? Tim, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. Seeing no questions.
Mike Rogers has his hand raised.
Okay, Supervisor Rogers.
So what is the downside to come back to the county board when we need to do a budget adjustment? That is what we're here for.
The downside, like I mentioned, is we're getting these in some cases dribs and drabs, a couple $1,000s here, 20,000 there. We did get one incentive check for $192,000 very early on. You could have, a whole slew of budget adjustments clogging the process. as well as the fact that in some cases, depending on the timing of the receipt of the funds, we could receive notice and have to wait a department would have to wait 6 to 8 weeks potentially to be able to utilize the funds. And in certain situations related to grants, the timing is very tight as far as the window of opportunity to utilize the funds. And this by no means is intended to be a normal course of business. It's really just reflecting kind of the fluid nature of COVID-19, the response, and the quick way we're having to spend money. For example, the technology, this Zoom technology that was purchased, that was not in the budget for this year, nor was it intended, to purchase all the licenses, the headsets that many of us are using, in some cases, some of the other technical computer and other equipment that really was not planned to be purchased, had to be purchased to be able to have people work remotely or provide services. So really it is trying to build in that flexibility and not have the time delay.
Any other questions?
Supervisor Kinnear here.
Supervisor Kinnear.
The budget adjustments, as I understand it, will be brought to us to approve at the end of the cycle. During our regular meetings, will we be updated just on what will be needed to be adjusted? Kind of an update each meeting saying we did this and this and this. You don't have to approve it, but we did this. That'd be kind of nice to hear or see. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Kinnear. That's a great question. Essentially, that should be should be taking place from the departments through the standing committee meetings as they do their report outs and their reactions. And certainly at this point, we're still trying to process budget adjustments within reason. So if we have a definitive information, we're going ahead and moving those forward. If you look at the agendas for Health and Human Services, for example, we've already had at least 1 or 2 budget adjustments already related. It's in everyone's interest to continue to stay on top of that. It's just departments with support like this would not have to be so slowed down waiting for the process to go through. But yes, your question is excellent, and that is the intent of still having departments go through the standing committees through the normal processes and updating them as they go.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Supervisor Burek.
Would there be any money for the loss of the county sales tax that could go towards that?
I can chime in on that as well.
We're certainly
simply
hoping.
unknown.
There are so many factors here going on. There's all kinds of announcements going on as far as SCORE, as far as this latest proposal from the House of Representatives at the federal level that's supposed to send funding to local units of government. But the devil's in the details. So far, the announcements that I've seen and heard do not have anything that they put very tight restrictions that has to be directly related. And to date, it's not been for lost revenue. There's been discussion along that lines, but nothing that's been officially noticed.
The prudent local government is not going to hold its breath counting on monies to offset lost revenues.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Supervisor Anderson, do you have a question?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions, so this can be a voice vote. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Who was that?
I don't know. Did we have one opposed?
Mike Rogers.
Supervisor Robert Rogers? Okay. The motion passes.
I can.
Moving on. Okay, moving on to 9B, Committee on Administration, resolution adopting the Families First Cornwallis Response Act provisions. And I need a motion to this.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move. Supervisor Morehouse.
Okay, and Supervisor Headland seconds then. Speaking to this, we'll have County Manager, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, very briefly, in March, the president signed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that modified the Family and Medical Leave Act. It also affected unemployment compensation insurance benefits, and it created an Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. We implemented all of those under the emergency powers granted to the county manager by the county board in March when the state of emergency was declared. What this resolution does is this gives the county board a chance to memorialize the adoption of those policies.
Any questions? I don't see any. This is a voice vote. So all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. Moving on to 9C from the Facilities Committee, a resolution regarding the 2020 Dunn County Fair. I need a motion for this.
So moved.
Supervisor Maves moves. I didn't catch who the second was. Supervisor McCullough seconds. Speaking to this resolution. Supervisor Maves. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you is a resolution that's been drafted together. On May 6th, the Facilities Committee and the Fair Board held a joint meeting to go over the future of the fair, because there were many questions that needed to be answered as far as fiscal responsibility, if they sign contracts with different like the carnival or entertainment, whatever. And if nobody would come to the fair, well, then it'd be losing money. So that was an issue. But the main purpose was to make sure that we allow the youth of Dunn County to be able to show their projects, whether it be 4-H, FFA, or what other youth activities at the fair, because we all understand and we know how important that is. So like I say, before you is a resolution that was drafted. I do want to make one clarification. I've had some calls as far as for understanding, and in the paragraph itself that starts, now therefore be it resolved, when you get down to the third line and it says related activities that can be conducted remotely, this was drafted with the understanding that the Dunn County would still be following the Health Administration Order number 20-01, which was signed on May 14th, 2020 by the Director of the Dunn County Health Department. And that is states that there could be no gathering of more than 10 people and having your 6 feet distance between them, etc. And the Fair Board is fully understanding of that. And so it will be up to the Fair Board to determine how they will go about the showing of the animals, what they will do. They will be in charge of that, but they're fully understanding that this would be passed under those guidelines. So I had some people, there won't be anybody there. And the answer is no, it will be up to the Fair Board to determine how to conduct that. And the fact that there will not be any commercial things going on in the commercial buildings, they will have a lot more floor space to operate. So therefore, that's why I urge your support for this resolution this evening.
Any questions or other speaking to the resolution? Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the resolution, and you know, this is almost a flashback for me to the July 15th windstorm of 1980, when most of Dunn County was without electricity and farmers were milking cows with portable generators. And Keith Summerfield, the county agent, says the fair goes on. And it wasn't a fair like we'd normally have had, but the fair went on and people made adjustments. And I was dairy superintendent at the time, and I thought it would have been right to postpone it, but they were absolutely correct in going forward with what adjustments they had to make. And I think it's a perfect example of what we're doing now. We don't have trees across our driveways, but we have restrictions in other areas. And I think you give the task of the people in Dunn County that work with youth in all different areas, and they'll find an answer. And it won't be the same, but it will be something to remember. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I've thought a lot about this. I think the decision is right. I congratulate facilities and the Fair Board. But I do have a question. I know the way they're going to show animals. I understand take them out of the trailer, bring them into the show ring. Once the judging is done, they'll put them back in the trailer and probably take them home. There's another program that's been very successful here in Dunn County, and it's the Meat Animal Project. And nobody has addressed how that's going to be handled. That's the project where these students raise an animal that's going to be sold, you remember, on Saturday night at public auction. And then they go immediately to slaughter. Then the slaughtering places here in Silers and Pleasant Valley down in Elk Mound, they follow up later and have a great educational event there with these carcasses. My question is this: how is the meat animal? Nobody has answered that to me. I understand everything else, and I think it'll work. How is the Meat Animal Project going to work this year? Will those, you can't have an auction. How, does somebody have an answer for me on that?
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Maves.
I do not have an answer on that, that exact question. That is something that we're leaving to the Fair Board and those people to work out the details, because they are much more familiar with the logistics and how to make that work. I know it is going to work, but I do not have a direct answer to Mr. Anderson. I will reach out to the Fair Board and ask for a definite plan, and then I will address Mr. Anderson via email with the answers that I find.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you, Supervisor Maves. I guess that's going to be a real challenge. But I would appreciate the fact that that's all you can do is reach out and see if they can find a way to do it. Because how do you have an auction?
Mr. Chairman?
I know somebody's asking a question, but I don't know who.
I think it's Supervisor Niehoff, but you're muted.
Well, they made a,
I believe it's Supervisor Niehoff. There you are.
And I was using the space bar and it wasn't working.
okay.
Supervisor Anderson, that was discussed to a certain degree in regards to the meat animals. And I know that they have already been in contact with Silers and Springbrook Meats and Durant Smokehouse in regards to that. But you have a very interesting question. We also discussed to a certain degree about live streaming some of the events. So by using live streaming, there could be something worked out in regards to that to be able to hold an auction.
All right.
Supervisor Rogers has his hand up.
Supervisor Rogers.
I'm concerned with the way it's written. It says that events can only be conducted remotely. My understanding of the discussion was that they could still come in and show and they could still have the meat auction. And now you're saying they can only do everything remotely? Is that what they're saying in this?
Actually, the language of the resolution is permissive, can be conducted remotely, doesn't mean shall be conducted remotely. Our intent here is not to prohibit the 4-H, FAA, and other youth-oriented activities from the organizations that take place, but rather to assure that doing so, we're trying to the best of our ability to follow the recommendations from the Public Health Department regarding COVID. So I believe the proper interpretation, and certainly can attest to the intent of this resolution, is to be permissive and not dismissive or prohibitive. And that's the way we will interpret it for the purposes of application.
The resolution does say shall, not 2020 Dunn County Fair shall consist only of 4-H and other youth groups related activities that can be conducted remote.
That can be. I suppose two people can read it two ways. In the end, it'll boil down to enforcement if such is necessary. We have a very positive working relationship with the Fair Board. I've got no indication from the Facilities Committee or the Fair Board that there's any confusion about the intent, and there's certainly no intent on the part of law enforcement or the Public Health Department to prohibit any of these activities if they can be conducted safely.
So you're telling me that's supposed to say can and not shall?
No, I'm telling you that the word can is in place between the words that and be, and there's your permissive language.
The first part says shall, Supervisor Rogers, because it is just going to be a 4-H and youth fair basically, but the can before remotely means that it can be held remotely or it doesn't have to be.
I'm okay with your interpretation. I don't agree, but I'm okay with it.
All right. Any other questions? Speaking to. If not, this is a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. All right. Announcements. Does anybody have any announcements? Supervisor Gary Bjork.
Not an announcement, but a question. What's the possibility of the standing committees meeting in person after June 1st? Is that a good possibility or speculation?
It is at this point, Supervisor Bjork, speculation. We know everybody is eager to be able to get together. If we can accommodate it in a way that is dictated by good science and by the direction of our health officials, we will certainly do so. It's important that we realize that what's going with COVID-19 is something that remains fluid. We're going to keep monitoring the trends, and those trends are going to inform the science and the advice from the health professionals. If we can safely pull off in-person meetings with proper social distancing in rooms that have adequate air circulation, or perhaps through the use of PPE, we will certainly try to accommodate that.
Thank you.
Larry Bjork, Supervisor Larry Bjork.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to echo Jim Anderson's statement previously, and really how excited how the whole CR&T committee has to be that Broadband Forward is moving forward. When we had our meeting last week, it sounded like it had hit a snag. And like Jim will also mention that tourism is part of that. And, you know, a lot of the good things in life, like I'll say, being able to have a dairy breakfast or Dunn County participating in Alice in Dairyland, those things have gone away. So if we can get a little victory on broadband expansion in Dunn County, it's a great thing, and kudos to everybody that got it done.
Thank you. Any other announcements? Seeing done, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you all for attending, and thank you all for putting up with our technical difficulties. Thank you.